So, welcome to DevSecOps Talks with Paulina.
Yes.
And Andre and someone else, and I'm not gonna tell you whom just yet, because we have to say that there are a lot of marketing agencies out there who somehow find email of our podcast, and we are getting quite a number of inbound suggestions for the guests.
Yeah.
Which we don't think it's a good thing if we bring the random people who we don't know to our audience. But you can tell us on LinkedIn if you'd like to see more guests, you tell us. But yeah, today is different since the guest we have today, he is coming from Norway and he's a startup founder, I think. And recently in Norway, they introduced a new tax legislation making life very, very hard for the for the startup founders. So we decided that, well, those guys have it hard already. So we can give them a hand and see what they have to tell. And this is how we have Davlet.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Hello.
Happy to be here. Very honored. So I'm Davlet, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, please, Davlet, tell us a little bit about yourself,
hmm
which is not a custom thing on this show. We usually drop people in without telling anything about them, but you have a chance to introduce yourself and the company you represent.
Yeah, perfect. Well, just shortly, I'm an engineer who turned entrepreneur. I've been in engineering for more than 15 years. Worked in a bunch of places, health tech, fintech, and worked at Microsoft. However, I've always had this entrepreneurial bone in myself, and for the past 8 years, I've been exclusively in startup world as a tech lead, as a CTO. And as part of this experience, I've had to manage infrastructure myself. A lot of DevOps sort of fell on my shoulders because you don't get the luxury of having a dedicated platform team until a certain point in the company life. So a lot of things I had to learn myself, and in a sense, I bring both developer perspective on it, but also I would say novel perspective. But I also wanted to learn what the best practices in DevOps and how things are, and that sort of brought me more and more interested in that space. And the sort of last experience that really sealed the deal for me, and which sort of makes sense why I created a company that I'm working on now. In my previous AI startup, we were onboarding a Fortune 500 company as a client, and one of their requirements were to get ISO 27001 certification. And there are a lot of tools available in the market, GRC tools that help you with getting compliance, right? Like Drata, Vanta, the most popular ones. So it's been quite okay experience, if costly. The only sort of complaint that I would say, however, the part that they didn't cover was the cloud infrastructure, right? They would show you the issues in your cloud, but you have to solve them yourself. And to get that upgrade, sort of to make our infrastructure compliant with all those rules, that easily took 2-3 months of work, right? Not full-time work, but it was pretty intense, and that kind of opened my eyes that okay, that compliance and security in general, it's quite involved, right? And digging in that space, it seems like we haven't found something that would just do it like this, right, in one click. And this is the inspiration for Cloudgeni, cloud compliance in one click.
Right. And you're saying your previous startup.
Yes. So it's not my previous AI. It's not my first AI startup, right? I mean, when ChatGPT 3.5 dropped 2 years ago, I immediately knew that the world is not going to be the same as before, right? It's going to take some time to really rip the benefits, but even in the hallucination and all faulty model I could see the potential and started tweaking and experimenting in this area. So previous startup was actually quite generic. We were doing UI UX generation, and we were one of the best at the time Early on, we were, V0 was the only option alternative. Today, you have a lot of those. You have Lovable, Bolt, many of these guys. But yeah, so we sort of found ourselves in a very crowded market with product that we couldn't differentiate much. So I decided to leave and start something where I felt like was higher need and less, in a sense, less alternatives, I would say.
Also more niche.
Yes, exactly. More niche, more focused. And I also changed my approach to AI, right? I think AI is just one important part of a puzzle, but you can't just solve everything with AI. And especially when it comes to something so risky in the sense and important as infrastructure, right? You can iterate with code. If it works half of the time, you can iterate on top of that, right? Your infrastructure you cannot have the same sort of approach as you would in an iterative approach in software engineering. So it has to be correct. And this is where we are trying to differentiate, right? To provide tools for DevSecOps people which they can trust at least 90% of time, right? 90 to 100% of time. And that's a very high threshold. So today, best coding benchmarks are at 70%. And this is like the gold standard. So we need to do a lot of work to actually get to the 90, 95, 99% accuracy. And that's the accuracy that from our experiences, from our interviews, that DevSecOps professionals would expect from such kind of tool. Because, I would say that people in this industry usually are more conservative in their mindset, and for a good reason, because you don't want to shake the boat if everything works, right? So you need to be really compelled to change how you do things, right? Because any change introduces also cascading things. So that's why our approach is to be like super nimble and easy for the SecOps. Yes.
Let me try to digest this. So you have an offering which is in a cloud compliance phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's while preparing for the show, we spoke that there is a difference between security and compliance, and you mostly targeting the controls that is automatically possible to check, right? That's something that what Drata or Vanta would do. So they would scan your AWS, GCP, Azure, what you have, and will give you a bunch of findings like your S3 bucket needs to have a versioning enabled for no good reason and stuff like that. And then it's problematic for people to go around and fix it. That's the proposition here, right? So that's the
Exactly.
platform you have will automate that remediation.
Yes. So we use those signals from GRC tools, but also cloud providers, they have their own monitors. So we connect to those, and we also show it in our dashboard, right? All the controls that are failing. And typically they would provide, you with documentation at best, right? Right. How you remediate, maybe in ClickOps. What we do is we integrate with your infrastructure as a code. And then we apply the fix, or we propose the fix in the form of pull request directly into your infrastructure based on the control that is failing, based on the resources that are failing.
Okay, so it scans like the AWS account, finds which control are failing based on some compliance policy like SOC, PCI, HIPAA, whatever, and then it tries to make a pull request fixing those failing controls into your Terraform or whatever you have, right, to update.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How does it know that this problem needs fixing? Because if you take, for instance, AWS best practices, for instance, AWS Security Hub has compliance frameworks in there, and they have something called AWS best practices framework there. Criticals, kind of okay. Yeah, you probably need to address those. Highs, most probably you need to address those. But everything that goes down medium and low, I would argue they mostly to make you pay more money for AWS, and they doesn't
Mm.
really bring you much benefit in terms of security or compliance. So there
Yeah.
is some discretion that needs to be done. Is it something that the platform can do for us, or we still need to have a humans in the loop to apply discretion?
That's actually a very good suggestion. This is something we could think about, right? Sort of prioritizing what's more critical. For now, we trust that whoever gonna use the platform, they sort of well, we will guide it by the controls, right? Because not all of the findings, let's say in AWS Security Hub that you mentioned, are directly linked to SOC 2, for example, or ISO 27001, right? So we focus with those popular frameworks now. And usually to get those, you don't need to fix everything. You just need to have like a, quite reasonable actually security posture. I would say a lot of critical and highs will probably match very nicely with their requirements as well. So in that sense, it's it's a still discretion of a developer. However, what we all bring to the table is that, well, it's if it's so easy to fix it, why just not fix it? Why if it like I understand it used to take like a week for particularly complex cases, right? Now, if you can do it in less than an hour and 55 minutes of it is going to be just code review, right? Because we generated in less than 5 minutes. So then why not get your perfect OCD person liking posture, right? So that's sort of our premise to make it easy. How it will look in the reality. I
And here
think that
comes
people will choose.
I think here comes also like how much time you have to fix it. Because from my own experience, like similarly like Andre, we don't really address anything below critical or high. Yeah, that's even in some customers, that's not very often the case because also people don't have time to neither address it, neither do the changes unless it's really necessary. Unless the security person, the team really push you to do it. That's one thing. And another question which I have is like, can you because some industry is gonna have more specific compliance requirements for
Mm,
particular industry, whatever they are doing in. Are
mm,
you supporting this as well, that they can specify their own way, their own restrictions or rules to be compliant as
yeah,
well, or
yeah.
it's not supported currently?
Yeah, love that question, and actually, it kind of goes down into the second part of the solution, right? So first part is remediation, right? You start with something broken and you fix it according to those rules and standards. The second part comes, well, once you have everything remediated, how do you maintain it, right? And preferably not in a way when you introduced the change that opened up the security breach, but before it been introduced. And that's where the second part will be the prevention and based on the same rules and also custom policies. So in our discussion with potential customers, a lot of those that are, let's say, mid-market and enterprise level, oftentimes they have very specific industry or customer demanded policies, right? And oftentimes these policies are just Excel or Word document, right? This is what we require from you. So what we are able to do with LLMs is to have natural language policies, right, that will be enforced, and underneath we map them to more static analysis and other strict rules. But from the user's perspective, you just can say, hey, all resources have to be encrypted, right? And then whatever resource you're trying to introduce, it will catch it and also provide you with a potential fix. How can you introduce this S3 bucket? What you need to change so that you can load it.
Question. For this tool to work, my understanding is that you also need to have your code described using infrastructure as code, right? Or your cloud infrastructure needs to be described as infrastructure as code, presumably with Terraform.
Yes.
If I have a person who has like a ClickOps, he just click ops his way into
Mhm.
cloud.
Yeah.
Is that something for them?
Yeah, it's not because we do believe that if if you want to have a secure and compliant and scalable infrastructure and being able to provide evidence in an easy way, I think infrastructure as a code's still by far best way to deal with it.
Right.
So what we offer for those customers is migration, right? They can start with ClickOps. We do migration for them to Terraform or any other IaC they are interested in, and then we can start remediating on top of those. So that's what we did for our pilot customers.
I see. On our board, that podcast listeners cannot see, but people who are watching on YouTube can. If you're just listening, don't worry, there is not much in there. It's just the questions that we prepared for Davlet. And so we're voicing them out, so you're not missing anything. But what we have there is we have a picture of the train approaching, and we have a number of questions there. Where we're supposed to be throwing Davlet under the train. And all right, let's start with the first question. As a business owner, like the business owners, they see compliance as a necessity, but it's not something that adds revenue. It's just something they just have to do because the
Yeah.
state tells them they just have to do it, but they doesn't really want it. And as in my experience, I can see that people will try to fly as low under the bar as they can just to pass through, and they don't really care. So why would business owner care really about that? Like if
Yeah.
they're trying to do as little as possible.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think for oftentimes it seems like a hurdle. I would say if I look into those, for example, specific controls like ISO 27001, SOC 2, they make sense to me, right? As a young engineer, I always felt like, oh, compliance is boring and it's just an obstacle on doing work. This time I have started appreciating it more, understanding, okay, those rules are written for a reason, right? Exposing your database to internet maybe not a good idea, right? And you would be surprised how many, let's say, especially startups, I would say, and including the ones that I did myself, we don't look at it until we have to, or until actually incident happen, and that's a very scary thing to happen, right? So those rules are for a reason, and so on one hand, just to answer your question, yes, it is just to pass the bar. On the other hand, it gives you the bare minimum for your security, right? It's not going to protect you from anything, but to the question, what's the difference between compliance and security? I would say it provides you the bare minimum for the security, right? So then you're protected against the most obvious attacks, right? But breaches. And then the second reason is, well, what it comes from it is that, well, when you talk to your own, this business owner talks to their own potential customers, they will also want to ensure that you have at least some bare minimum in terms of security, that whatever software you provide to them will not be the vector of attack on the larger organization, especially if you deal with bigger companies, with enterprise companies, and everyone wants to sell to them. So that becomes a necessity in the sort of customer meetings and customer sales process. It becomes much easier if you can just show a report, which we also provide, where you can say, hey, we take it seriously. Here are the controls we are tracking, and this is how we may ensure that your data is protected.
Right, but the tools like Rata and Vanta, they also provide reporting and make compliance easy. So would the business owner need to buy two tools? So they would need to pay for Vanta and then either spend time of their engineers to fix those warnings, or buy your tool and then have it fixed.
Yeah. No, I think those tools are great. I really recommend them. Like any sort of, if I have any criticism, that's the price, right? They are quite pricey, especially if you're a startup. Sometimes they're out of reach for companies to use, but they provide quite an easy way to achieve most of the compliance. But like I mentioned earlier, the cloud part is you still have to do mostly manually, right? Your engineers have to spend time on it. and that's cost, right? And that's what we intend to remove. And interestingly enough, oftentimes, if you want to sell to, let's say, other companies, you don't always need a certification, but you need to provide a proof that you take the same approach as those certifications, right? And then you don't need to buy such an expensive tool like Lambda and Drata, and you can just have your own policies and provide a report from our tool, for example, at a fraction of a price of cost, to say, hey, our infrastructure is solid, and here's our information security management rules that we adhere to.
Can you
there are
say
also
that
other
if,
tools. So
yeah,
please go ahead, Matthias.
but isn't the difference also in the other tools like One-Time Secure Frame that they kind of collecting the data and then just show you the state, right? Your tool is collecting data and adding remedies to be compliant, right? This is the change that you want to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is our main advantage, I would say. Like we are not really replacing those tools per se, right? But we are replacing a lot of work that is left to do when you potentially use those tools, right? A lot of manual work that you have to do.
Yeah, we're using the tool and you get a lot of manual work, but it also get a lot of false positives from those tools, as any scanner today you get. So how do you see can you, when you get the remedies from your tool, can you like sort them and say like, we don't want to do this, it doesn't apply to us, or work out?
Yeah. You can skip control and say, hey, we don't need to take care of this because it is a dev database, right? We are not worried about this. This is not a user database. So these kind of things, it's possible.
So there are also.
Yeah, please go ahead, Matthias. Sorry.
No, but okay. So now we're going. I mean, Secure Frame want a like tool that just collect data and show you the state, but there are other tools as well that goes into the compliant phase, right? I don't think they go into making changes, right? You have to correct me here, Andre, but they are like WIS and Okra security. They also go in and scan your cloud infrastructure and find like loopholes and like how AMIs are connected and roles and access and control to find security holes in that sense. But I don't see. I don't
say about these.
Yeah.
Actually, something that I was trying to say twice now.
Yeah.
So the Wii's, I can't really tell much about them because I haven't used the tool, but I used Orca to do a couple of scans. And what Orca has is they have the same kind of compliance suits. So they would do the same scanning, and they also have an AI feature where you say, yeah, do the pull request and fix it for me. So they sell that, but they go beyond it. So they have a lot of attack path detection, and like Orca, for instance, like what I would like there is they would take up to 14 different signals into account to determine the risk score. So a lot of the basic tools like Security Hub, for instance, they would just check one criterion, right? S3 bucket has no versioning enabled.
Yeah.
Here you go. That's your finding. Go fix it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take anything into account. And like, for instance, Orca, what's nice about it is that it goes and takes a lot of stuff into account. So for instance, in one scan, customer had EC2 instance, which was publicly available with what was Logshell vulnerability, Log4j vulnerability.
Yeah.
Which is remotely exploitable. And technically, any kind of scanning tool like AWS Inspector would ring all the bells, like drop everything, go fix it. But what Orca did, they also checked the state of the EC2 and it stopped. So there is a 9.8 CVE on that machine. That machine is publicly exposed. It's bad, but it stopped, so it couldn't be exposed. So they lower their risk score to 7 instead of 9 or 10, which actually gives your team a way to prioritize. So they kind of doing the triage for you, and they also explain what's going on, and then allow you to, for some things that if it's Terraform and they have access to the GitHub, for instance, then they allow generate the pull requests to fix Terraform.
Mm. Yeah. No, those like you mentioned both ways, and I haven't used Orca, but these are more comprehensive security posture management tools, right? So they have vulnerability attacks, penetration tests. They check the full life cycle, application level. I would say infrastructure, but a little bit differently. A lot of work that they do is it's based on static analysis, right? And remediation, at least to my awareness, also based on those typically strict rules, right? And those are great tools, very comprehensive, very expensive as well, usually enterprise level, big beasts. What we are really offering is a more nimble approach that is targeted towards compliance, right? Again, like I mentioned, it's not the same way that you can say if I'm compliant, I'm fully secure. No, you can't claim that. However, you can claim that you did the minimum reasonable amount to ensure you are protected against most of the cases, right? In your infrastructure. And this is the assurances that we provide and easiness of use on top of that. And just to sort of differentiation as well. So again, they're more of a static analysis tools. We use AI to understand the context of your infrastructure, both from code perspective, but also getting signals from cloud provider itself, and then providing the fix that is relevant for you. So I can give you an example that I was struggling, for example, when I was achieving the ISO 27001, my previous startup, which is, your database should not expose to internet. Well, if you need to make it private, then suddenly all your services lose access to it as well. Yeah, you can't, your analytics software that is third party cannot access it as well. So you have to create all the infrastructure around it to be able to use it. So you need to think, like in Azure, you would need to create a private link connection. You would create the networks and subnets, set it up, everything secure access. And then after that, you should be able to use it. If you just do the flip from public to private, you will have an outage. So this kind of knowledge that we are baking into the tool, right? Awareness that, well, sometimes it's not just superficial fix, but you have to understand that it exists in the context of your whole infrastructure. So then you need to make changes accordingly.
Question: can you do the shift left here and put it? Do you have IDE plugin as well? Can you check it already there, or this is only for infrastructure which is already in Git or in deployed and so on?
Yeah, we could potentially. We were thinking about the IDE. I think it's a little bit different mode between IDE and what we provide. So our goal was, in the end, is to give you something that you can confidently merge without potentially any changes, right? When you work with IDE, it's more iterative, right? You have already very great coding agents. They're not perfect, but they can get you into the right direction with the right documentation. I think a lot of DevOps professionals already start using it, GitHub Copilot, Cursor. So if our goal is to get you to the 100% for now, we went with integrating with your GitHub and creating pull requests. In the future, we might consider an extension.
Another thing here is that if how do I put this? I'm thinking to do a plug because we see people struggling with compliance. So like I have a consultancy company and we build the AWS landing zone that kind of prevents those problems from happening. So if you start with the landing zone, which has all the stuff addressed, then you don't need to worry about that later on. And then if also the landing zone comes with a data perimeter in it, and declarative policies and RCPs and all of that, then most of that compliance stuff have no chance to even happen because like SCPs and RCPs will prevent that. But yeah, that's just a different approach. Like if you are starting today on AWS, go get yourself a landing zone. It's not very expensive and it will solve you so many problems down the stream. One can also argue as a startup owner, you might never have those problems because your company will not reach the point where those problems are relevant. But if you're actually serious about what you're doing and you hope to succeed, I would strongly consider going finding some provider around you who you trust, like was us being one of them, but just go consider having a landing zone because you're saving yourself so much headache downstream, and your out is becoming so much easier. Just like
Two different approach, but
an advice.
I mean, there's a lot of regulation coming now. Like in Europe, NIS2 is coming. It's gonna hit a lot of companies. SOC 2 is maybe not that much in Europe, but there are a lot of regulation coming. And if you're a small company today and starting, and you will get the compliance, like where should you go, right? It's kind of a big task to drag by yourself in a smaller company. So yeah, you need to start with one of the tools we are mentioning here, right?
You would think as a business owner, right? So
Yeah.
you would make you would do what makes sense for the business. So for instance, if SOC 2, if you're in B2B and SOC 2 gets you more integrations and more contracts and everything, and through SOC 2 you can show other people that you're serious, then you go and get SOC 2. You get SOC 1, SOC 2, but how hard you go about that, well, that's probably a discretion of every single business owner. Like there are some industries like healthcare. In US, for instance, you have to be HIPAA compliant if you're processing PHI. Like there is no way around it. That's a part of the cost of doing business in that industry. The same with the credit card. And now, like, you have Mika in EU for the cryptocurrencies. You have Dora coming up. So yeah, some of them are cost of doing business. Some of them let you learn more business. So that's why people doing that.
Yeah. And another thing I was thinking about, we talked about different IaC tools here, like we talked about Terraform, but what are the other ones you support? I'm guessing like Terraform and OpenTofu is like the standard, but
Yeah.
Pulumi maybe? No.
We've been focusing on Terraform primarily. One of the reasons is that also that standard coding agents are pretty bad at it in general, because there is just less data available out in the internet, and the examples out there not necessarily the best examples, right? You have good but also bad, but amount of code written is just so little, and it's probably true for all IaC. But yeah, we've been mostly focusing on Terraform, but the ambition is to support Pulumi and all the cloud specific IaC as well. Like we have a conversation with a company that's on Azure Bicep, for example. So yeah, it's in our interest to support all of that.
Yeah, biceps is an amazing name. Have you heard about it? It's like the biceps. that's amazing.
But can't you use your agent also to set up IaC task for you, right? Because now you're just using it for like, oh, this bucket is unencrypted. Here's the updated Terraform to encrypt it. I mean, you can easily just ask it for like, can you help me set up a bucket, and I will do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is where we started, right? We started thinking we're gonna be the DevOps, teammate.
Yeah.
There are a couple of reasons why we decided to pivot a little bit to more compliance, and one of them is that, again, I mentioned a bit earlier, but the sensitive nature of infrastructure, right? It's easy to make a mistake that you just overlook in the code, and in general, there is less trust to AI, I would say, among DevOps professionals compared to, let's say, software engineers. Just based on my observations, I don't know if that's true or not, but And I think it's warranted, right? Because you deal with sensitive things, and you need to have high assurances in the tools that you're using. And the bar to the quality, let's say, to be there needs to be quite high, right? It can't be 70%, it has to be 90 at least.
Yeah.
And that's why when you deal with general infrastructure, there are so many ways, there are so many variations. It's much harder to sort of narrow it down. With compliance, we behind the scenes we do use a lot of tools that DevSecOps uses, right? Static analysis tools. We don't do just a LLM wrapper in a sense, and that allows us to provide the right documentation for LLMs to draw from, to even provide it with fixes that would typically be done, right? But in the context of, let's say, of this typical organization, this is where we combine static analysis plus LLM.
Yeah.
And that's what allows us to claim those results. If we go with general infrastructure, we still think we want to go there eventually. And for beta users, we allow that to do that. But to scale it to really serious levels, we need to do quite a lot of investments, I would say. And that's true for any company.
Yeah. Cool. So if you look a little bit to the future, what do you see is going to happen? I mean, some people are asking, like, with like SRE, setting up cloud environment, do you see that agents will come more and more in? You said before that, for example, the security people can just write a document like everything should be encrypted, and then when a developer says, like, give me a bucket, he can just write that to LLM, and then you combine the policy document with the developer's request and the bucket created. Do you see that? How do you see the future will come with this agent and IaC and cloud provider?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think all of what you said, I think our work will change to more of orchestrators. So everyone will become a sort of a team lead of their own, stack of agents that do different parts of work, right? There are going to be agents for SRE, for cost optimizations, for compliance, for general infrastructure. We see a lot of companies kind of moving into this space. And I think, again, to crack that market, I think the reliability has to increase. And for that to happen, these tools need to really start using the same tools that engineers would use, right? To provide the solid foundation on top of creativity that LLMs provide.
Cool. I think with that we're hitting like 40 minutes, and that's usually our time break. And the last words, Paulina, Andre, to the
Do you want to have a joke?
joke?
A joke?
It's an AI joke.
Go ahead.
It's an AI joke.
Oh, okay.
I'm terrible at telling jokes. Anyhow, I seen it today. It was news that more than 74% of people confused ChatGPT 4.5 in a voice mode, like when you can converse with it. They confused it. They confused the model with a real person. They actually thought, like, they had to compare. They thought the model was a real person and the real person was a model. Which I can relate to, because actually yesterday I had a random idea of starting construction business. I quite often have random ideas about starting random businesses, which I have no idea about. And I was just walking and thinking, like, how I can get crack on it and like start to think about it. And while walking, I just started to talk to ChatGPT 4.5, and they went long way in a conversational mode. Like, it's just amazing. You like talking to the real person. And I spent 25 minutes just going back and forth, like, tell me what would be the typical staff requirements, what are the licenses requirements, how that work, how this work, what are the type of contracts, and so on. That was really good. And today I saw that news, and it was people discussing the news. And one person wrote, I wonder what we're going to get first, the agent that can replace me on the meetings so I can code better, or the agent that will code instead of me so I don't need to go to the meeting at all, they can replace me.
Yeah.
So it was kind of an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's both exciting but also a little bit scary life or future. But I'm still positive. I think there are parts of work that we will still be very human. That we need to make decisions in the end.
With amount of money being pumped into that area,
Mm.
I don't think we can do anything about it. It's like a train
Yeah.
that
We
we
can only
cannot stop.
adjust.
Yeah.
You can only hope to jump on the train, and that's
Yeah.
your best choice right now.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. With that,
With
let's.
this,
Thanks for tuning in.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Bye bye.
Bye.
You have been listened to DevSecOps Talks with Matthias, Andre, and Paulina. For notes and information, please visit devsecops.fm. Thanks for tuning in.